3 legacy lessons from Hollywood's most mysterious families. You've seen the iconic smiles, frozen in time, the perfect family portraits, radiating a warmth that felt too good to be true. The towering legends of Hollywood's golden age, who seemed to live the most charmed, untouchable lives. For decades, we were all sold a grand and glorious fantasy, a world of pristine stars, of moral paragons whose heroic on-screen personas were merely an extension of their real-life virtue. But what if that entire narrative was nothing more than a carefully crafted lie? What if I told you that some of Hollywood's most beloved and respected stars were living double lives so elaborate, so profoundly deceptive, they make today's fleeting celebrity scandals look like a walk in the park? This was not just an era of secrets. It was an era where entire lives were fabricated from scratch, an era where careers were built on false identities, where secret children were hidden away in plain sight to protect a fragile public image, and where the most compelling, heart-wrenching dramas weren't happening on the silver screen, but behind the locked doors of Hollywood's most exclusive mansions. And this wasn't just the work of a few rogue actors trying to cover their tracks. It was an industry-wide conspiracy, meticulously orchestrated by the old studio system, a powerful, all-controlling machine that literally owned its stars, from their names to their faces to their deepest, darkest secrets. The studios were dream factories, but they were also masters of deception, spending fortunes to bury any truth that threatened their bottom line. Today, we're pulling back the velvet curtain. We are unraveling the deals made with the devil and exposing the devastating family secrets that echoed for generations. These aren't just stories of scandal. They are the legacy lessons from Hollywood's most mysterious families, the lie that built a career. In the Golden Age, studios didn't just manage careers, they fabricated them wholesale. An actor was a product, and that product had to be marketable to a very specific vision of mainstream America. An actor's name, their backstory, their family history, even their ethnicity were all considered malleable clay, ready to be sculpted by studio executives. If the studio thought a more wholesome or all-American image would sell more tickets, then a new identity was born. This practice of passing for white was one of Hollywood's most pervasive open secrets, a desperate and often painful bargain made by actors who knew that revealing their true heritage meant the immediate and irreversible end of their careers. The price of that deal was a lifetime of suffocating fear, a constant anxiety of being exposed, and a tragic legacy of erased identity. Consider the haunting case of Merle Oberon, the glamorous and seemingly exotic star of timeless films like Wuthering Heights. To the adoring public, Oberon was the picture of distant, unattainable British aristocracy. The official story, cooked up by the studio and maintained by Merle herself, was that she was born in Tasmania, Australia, the daughter of a wealthy British army officer. She claimed her aristocratic father died in a hunting accident, and that her birth records, along with this inconvenient history, were conveniently destroyed in a fire. It was a complete and total fiction, a lie she clung to her entire life because she knew the truth was professional poison. It was a necessary lie in an era when Hollywood's infamous production code, or Hays Code, strictly forbade any on-screen depiction of interracial relationships. The truth was far more complex and infinitely more tragic. Merle Oberon was actually born Estelle Merle O'Brien Thompson in 1911 in Bombay, India. Her mother, Constance, was of Ceylonese, now Sri Lankan heritage, with Maori ancestry as well. Merle's skin tone, which Hollywood marketed as an exotic tan, was a source of lifelong terror. To conceal the scandalous circumstances of her birth to a young, unwed mother, Merle was raised by her grandmother Charlotte, whom she was told was her mother. Her own biological mother, Constance, was presented to her as her half-sister. This elaborate ruse followed her from India to England and finally to Hollywood. When she hit the big time, her grandmother, Charlotte, came with her, living out her final years posing as Merle's loyal maid to keep the illusion alive. The lie was so absolute, the fear so deeply ingrained, that when Merle visited Tasmania late in her life, the press hounded her about her supposed origins. Overwhelmed by the questions and the terror of her lifelong secret unraveling, she reportedly collapsed under the strain. And then there's the woman who became the ultimate love goddess, a pin-up idol for millions of GIs in World War II, but whose path to stardom demanded a painful and public erasure of her own identity, the unforgettable Rita Hayworth. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino, she was the daughter of a Spanish father and an Irish-American mother. From a very young age, she was a phenomenally gifted dancer, performing in her father's troupe across California and Mexico. But when Hollywood scouts took notice, the vibrant Margarita Carmen Cancino was deemed too ethnic for leading lady status. The powerful head of Columbia Pictures, Harry Cohn, took one look at her and ordered a complete, systematic transformation. She endured 2 years of painful, continuous electrolysis to drastically raise her naturally low ethnic hairline. Her beautiful, natural black hair was dyed that iconic, fiery auburn red. Most significantly, her name was stripped away. Margarita Cancino became Rita Hayworth, a softer, more Anglo-Saxon sounding name, adapted from her mother's maiden name, Hayworth. The studio publicity machine spun this radical transformation as a story of professional dedication, but let's call it what it was, a complete whitewashing of her identity. While her Latina heritage remained an open secret within the industry, it was carefully managed for the public, allowing her to occupy a bizarre space as both an exotic bombshell and an all-American girl next door. The world fell deeply in love with Rita Hayworth, but what they were loving was a carefully constructed illusion, not the real Margarita Cancino. The children hidden in plain sight. While some stars were forced to hide their own identities, others had to go to even more extreme lengths, hiding their own flesh and blood. In an era governed by strict morality clauses in studio contracts, having a child out of wedlock was a career-ending catastrophe, particularly for a female star whose image was built on wholesomeness and purity. The studios, acting as ruthless protectors of their multi-million-dollar investments, went to incredible lengths to conceal these secret children. They orchestrated elaborate cover-ups, fabricating illnesses and long European vacations, all to protect their stars from public ruin. The result was a devastating legacy of pain, confusion, and lost identity that would haunt these families for decades to come. One of the most infamous and genuinely heartbreaking examples is the story of Judy Lewis, the secret daughter of two of the biggest stars on the planet, Clark Gable, the undisputed king of Hollywood, and Loretta Young, a devout Catholic whose career was built on her girl next door image. The two had a passionate affair in 1935 while filming The Call of the Wild. At the time, Gable was married, and for Young, the realization that she was pregnant was a moment of pure terror. She knew a pregnancy outside of marriage would not only torpedo her wholesome image, but would likely get her blacklisted from Hollywood forever. To avoid the impending scandal, Young and her handlers orchestrated an incredible, multi-year deception. She announced a long vacation to Europe, disappearing from public view for months to hide her advancing pregnancy. She eventually returned to the States and gave birth in absolute secrecy in Venice, California. The baby, named Judy, was immediately placed in an orphanage. Then, in a move of breathtaking audacity, nearly 2 years later, Loretta Young publicly announced that she was adopting a little girl. She adopted her own biological daughter. It was a secret she guarded fiercely for decades, even from Judy herself. Imagine growing up in the orbit of Hollywood royalty, having no idea that the glamorous, distant movie star raising you was your mother, or that the king of Hollywood, Clark Gable, was your father. Judy only met Gable once, a brief and awkward encounter when she was 15, never knowing she was standing in front of her own dad. Judy later wrote in her powerful memoir, Uncommon Knowledge, about the profound and crippling identity crisis she suffered, a deep-seated feeling that something was fundamentally wrong in her life. It wasn't until Judy was an adult and engaged to be married that her mother finally, agonizingly, confessed the truth. Young only publicly admitted that Gable was the father in her official autobiography, which was published posthumously, taking the full story to her grave. But sometimes the secret wasn't kept from the public, but from the child himself, leading to a mind-bending revelation decades later that feels ripped from a screenplay. And that brings us to the absolutely wild story of Jack Nicholson. For 37 years, the legendary actor believed that his grandmother, Ethel May, was his mother, and that his biological mother, June, was his older sister. The story began in the conservative 1930s. June Nicholson, a dancer and showgirl, had become pregnant at just 17 years old and was unmarried. Facing social ruin and shame, her parents, Ethel May and John Nicholson, made a drastic and life-altering choice. They would raise Jack as their own son. June, his real mother, would simply be his big sister. The entire family committed to this secret, creating a web of silence that held for nearly 4 decades. The shocking, earth-shattering truth only came to light in 1974. A researcher from Time magazine, preparing a cover story on the now famous actor, was digging into his past and uncovered public records, a birth certificate that revealed the truth. The magazine, in an act of due diligence, called Nicholson to verify the information, and in that single phone call, dropped the bombshell that the woman he had known his entire life as his sister was, in fact, his mother. By that point, both June and Ethel May had passed away, robbing him of the chance to ever confront them, to ask them why, or to understand the sacrifice they made. In a bizarre twist of fate that seems too surreal to be true, Nicholson had just starred in Chinatown, a neo-noir masterpiece famous for its dark, twisted family secret involving incest, where one character tearfully reveals of another, "She's my sister and my daughter." When asked about this unbelievable real-life plot twist, Nicholson famously called it a pretty dramatic event, but insisted it wasn't traumatizing, even expressing a strange admiration for his family's ability to keep such a massive, life-defining secret for so long. The facade of the perfect family. For the studio system, the perfect family was the ultimate public relations tool. Stars, especially male stars, were practically contractually obligated to project an image of idyllic domestic bliss, whether it was real or not. Studio-arranged photo shoots in perfect homes with smiling children were splashed across magazines to sell the American public on a fantasy. But behind the carefully curated photo ops, many of Hollywood's most celebrated dynasties were crumbling under the immense pressure of maintaining the lie. The public image of the doting, loving parent often hid a dark and disturbing reality of abuse, neglect, and profound emotional distance, creating legacies of trauma that would eventually be exposed by the very children who had been used as props in their parents' public lives. No story shattered this pristine facade more famously or more violently than that of the legendary Joan Crawford and her adopted daughter Christina. To the world, Joan Crawford was a consummate cinematic icon and a saintly, devoted mother who had selflessly rescued 4 children from the hardship of orphanages. But in 1978, just 1 year after Joan's death, Christina Crawford released her explosive, culture-shifting memoir, Mommy Dearest. The book painted a horrifying, gothic picture of a childhood lived in constant, paralyzing fear. Christina alleged that the woman the world adored was, in private, a manipulative, pathologically controlling, and violent alcoholic who subjected her to years of unimaginable physical and emotional abuse. The memoir detailed infamous and shocking incidents, like the wire hanger episode, where Joan allegedly flew into a psychotic rage and beat a young Christina simply for having a wire hanger in her closet. Christina wrote about terrifying night raids, where her mother, often drunk, would wake the children in the middle of the night for frantic, manic cleaning sessions. She claimed her adoption, and those of her siblings, was less an act of maternal love and more a cold, calculated PR move to soften her tough public image and make her more sympathetic to the public. The book created a cultural firestorm, dividing Hollywood and the public. While many of Joan's famous friends and her 2 younger, twin daughters fiercely denied the allegations, Christina stood by her story, supported by her brother Christopher. Mommy Dearest became one of the first major tell-all memoirs to expose the dark underbelly of a celebrity family, forever changing how the world saw Joan Crawford and opening the floodgates for others to tell their own stories. But Joan wasn't the only beloved icon whose family life was a far cry from their carefully manufactured public image. Bing Crosby, the warm, friendly, pipe-smoking crooner whose voice was practically synonymous with Christmas and cozy family comfort, projected the ultimate image of a wholesome, easygoing American dad. Yet, his sterling legacy was also deeply and permanently tarnished by allegations from inside his own home. In 1983, his eldest son, Gary Crosby, published a memoir titled Going My Own Way. In its pages, Gary accused his world-famous father of being a cold, distant, and shockingly cruel disciplinarian who regularly subjected his four sons from his first marriage to physical and emotional abuse. Gary wrote that Bing would publicly weigh his sons, and that punishment for being even slightly overweight could include severe beatings with a leather belt. He described a father who was nothing like the gentle patriarch seen in films like White Christmas. The book sent shockwaves through a public that had only ever known Bing as a figure of comfort and kindness. The family was immediately and publicly split over the claims. Two of Gary's brothers, Lindsay and Dennis, had struggled their entire lives with addiction and depression, and both tragically died by suicide. While another brother, Philip, denied the allegations of abuse, Lindsay had previously confirmed them, lending significant weight to Gary's account. Years later, Crosby's daughter from his second marriage, Mary, claimed that Gary was a troubled man who was encouraged by publishers to exaggerate the stories for money. Whatever the absolute final truth may be, the dueling narratives fractured the family forever and revealed a deep, undeniable well of pain hiding behind Bing Crosby's smiling, public-facing dynasty. So these stories are so much more than just juicy old Hollywood gossip, aren't they? They are profound cautionary tales about the staggering human cost of fame, the corrosive power of secrets, and the psychological damage inflicted when a person's identity is treated as a commodity. The old studio system, in its relentless and unforgiving pursuit of profit and control, built towering legends on a foundation of lies, deception, and erased histories. The aftershocks of these choices created deep, generational trauma, leaving behind children with fractured identities and entire families torn apart by the weight of what was hidden. The golden glow of that bygone era, which we now look back on with such nostalgia, was, for many who lived inside it, a harsh, cruel, and unforgiving spotlight. It turns out the most compelling dramas, the most heartbreaking tragedies, weren't the ones projected onto the screen for the world to see. They were the silent, desperate battles fought behind the closed doors of Hollywood's most celebrated and mysterious homes. The legacies of these families teach us one powerful, undeniable lesson. The truth, no matter how deep you bury it, no matter how much money you spend to conceal it, eventually, always, finds its way to the surface. What other Hollywood secrets do you think are still waiting to be told? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth behind the legend.